Welcome to episode 295. On this week's episode, I chat with Eric SanInocencio about opportunities and challenges in digital in the college scene at the Atlantic Coast Conference, aka the ACC.
Welcome to Sports Geek, the podcast built for sports digital and sports business professionals. And now, here's your host who is thankful he can attend sports events, Sean Callanan.
Thanks, DJ Joel. Yes, my name is Sean Callanan, and I am super thankful that sports are returning to Melbourne. As I might have mentioned previously, went to an AFLW game and recording this now, but by the time this gets out, I will have been to an NBL Cup game. Really excited to see the NBL come to Melbourne. 36 games, 18 double headers, a little bit of a mid-season tournament, a little bit of a hub format. So congratulations to the NBL team, Jeremy LaLiga, obviously former podcast alumni. Terrific work to pull this off and to see sports and the NBL return to Melbourne. And thanks in advance. But by the time this records, I will have been to the NBL Cup. Thanks to Ben and Lawrence for hosting me last night. Also, congratulations in my part of the world. Just 10 minutes down the road from where I'm standing right now, the Australian Open has completed, and they've done a tremendous job, even with the curveball of a 5-day lockdown in the middle of the tournament where no fans were allowed. So all to Craig Tiley and his team and all the people I know at Tennis Australia, congratulations for your hard work. Really do appreciate it. I know the sports industry in this part of the world was watching your efforts very, very closely, and we're super pleased to see the event be a success, because it does set a path for more sports to return in 2021. As always, you can find me on the world of social media at Sean Callanan, or on most platforms, Sean Callanan on LinkedIn. Please reach out and connect with me. Tell me that you listen to the podcast. I'd love to connect with podcast listeners. As always, you can also get the Sports Geek news by going to sportsgeekhq.com/SGN. That is a weekly email where you find out what I read and you click. And sharing some articles that I think you should read, and also some podcasts I think you should listen to. It's a new initiative for Sports Geek News in 2021. I'd like your feedback. Are you liking the podcast interview episode recommendations that we are giving in the newsletter? I'd love your feedback. You can do so via the old-fashioned way. Email sean@sportsgeekhq.com. So please reach out anyway. And if you've listened to this immediately as I've released it, please stop listening right now. Turn it over. Gravitas is back. The LCO kicks off tonight, Feb 23. So you can go to gravitas.gg. That is our website. GG, if you don't know, means good game. That's what all the esports cool kids, they get their website with the .gg, and the people of Guernsey are very grateful that that domain is popular with the esports community. So you can go to gravitas.gg to stay up to date with Gravitas and follow them. I'd love you to follow the team this year. Before I get into my chat with Eric SanInocencio, please check out our Patreon campaign. I'm really very appreciative of all the Patreon supporters that do support the sports business content that we create across podcasting, Sports Biz Zoom, Sports Geek News, and various other activities. Really do appreciate it. You can do it at a personal level, or you can do it as a business. Just go to sportsgeekhq.com/Patreon to become a subscriber. Now, here is my chat with Eric SanInocencio from the ACC. You'll find out that it has taken me a few times to get Eric's pronunciation of Eric's name correct. So, again, my apologies in the intro, but for authenticity, I don't cut the flaws. You will see how badly I stuff it up in this interview. Thanks again, Eric. Enjoy the interview. Very happy to welcome to the podcast the Associate Commissioner of Strategic Digital at the ACC, the Atlantic Coast Conference, Eric SanInocencio. Oh, there we go. I knew I'd get it wrong, but I'm going to continue on. I'm going to forge on.
Keep going. You got it. You can do it.
SanInocencio. Apologies. For the people who don't know, I did that 7 times before hitting record, and I still stuffed it up. Again, my apologies, Eric. Welcome to the podcast.
No, thank you so much for having me. I've heard a lot of different iterations of my last name over the years, so I'll just add yours to the group.
Exactly. As I say, you can now get to call me Sian at least twice. That's what my Italian barista calls me. So, again, my apologies. Good to see you, my friend. Good to see you again. You attended some of the Sports Biz Zoom calls last year, and wanted to catch up. And normally when I start things on my podcast, how did you get your start in the world of sport?
Well, it's been a bit of a winding road. I've been very fortunate. Sports has always been a huge part of my life. I played athletics all the way growing up. I was fortunate enough to get a college scholarship. I was actually the first in my family to go to college, and sports got me there. And playing baseball in college got me that scholarship. So I've always had that deep connection. And my life motto has always been really simple, Sean. It's how do I find, what do I enjoy? And then how do I find a way for people to pay me to do it? And that's really kind of like how I've molded. And then halfway through my career, social started. And my biggest fear in 2007, 2008 was my boss at the time catching me on Twitter and being like, this is not part of your job. So I was like, how do I make this a part of my job so I don't get in trouble while I do it during work? And then we started creating Facebook groups, Twitter groups at the Gulf South Conference, which is a Division II league here in the States, very small. And then from there, others noticed. And now I have 13 years of experience in this. So it's been a fun and wild ride to see social media kind of start as this idea and now turn into the main function that so many of us have in terms of first interaction with the brands that we love and follow.
So Gulf Start Conference was one of your first gigs, and it was in that media relations content space?
Exactly. It was in sports information. So it's a traditional role here in the States. The person that sets up interviews, does stats, writes releases, got a bit of a journalistic bent to it. But when you're at a Division II conference, you have a lot of wonderful student athletes, but you don't have a ton of built-in following to these schools. So we've got to do whatever we can to spread that message. And social media was really, for me, I was like, oh, this is a way for us to connect with people who have relationships and affinity to these schools across the United States. So we started building out, like I said, these pages, and it was amazing to see people in Washington, people in Idaho that were fans of these small kind of remote schools in the Southeast. And at that point, the light bulb really went off for me. I was like, man, this is a way to connect people. This is a way to foster togetherness across the world. And from there, that's really where I took my kind of ideas and transitioned them into more of a digital space, and been fortunate since that point to work with some really huge brands like the Southeastern Conference, then onto the Houston Texans in the NFL, and then now currently with the ACC.
Okay, don't go too fast. Don't just skip over all of that good information, because I want to get there. So you're at the SEC Golf Conference, and then you went into agency land and sort of broadened your skill set at multiple conferences.
Yeah. So the way it works here is in 2009, when I started really getting into it with the Gulf South, they're located in Birmingham, Alabama. And the Southeastern Conference, which is probably what most people consider, at least from a football perspective, one of the premier leagues in all of athletics. You got Alabama, Auburn, the current national champion, stuff like that. They're also located, their conference offices in Birmingham. So you have some natural kind of connection. And so when I started doing this for the GSC, I had friends there and they called me and said, hey, can you do what you do for them for us? And so I literally switched conference offices there 15 miles away. And I had this kind of broad stroke goal set where it's like, hey, just do this for us. And I was singular. I think I was 27 at the time. I was the only person in the entire department. I was running the website. I was writing articles. I was doing podcasts. And then I was also running all the social feeds. And I created some of the social feeds that are still running today. So it was just a wild time because, you had Commissioner Mike Slive, who was in his 60s at the time. They knew like this was something, but they didn't know anything about it. And they really didn't want to know. They were just like, hey, you go off and do your thing. And for me, it was a great place to try, to fail, to just come up with these outlandish ideas without much supervision and then see what really worked. So I think those 4 years that I was at the SEC, I went to countless national championships, NCAA Final Fours, and to kind of look from a conference perspective, because it's so different when you're with a team, which was my next opportunity, and when you're with a league, because a league, it's like all of these schools are your children, right? So at the ACC, we've got 15 kids, and we've got to support Clemson in football the same way we support Duke in basketball and the way we support Florida State in baseball. So it gives you kind of this higher perspective of what's going on instead of being in the trenches with one team. And I think that's helpful sometimes because when you're in social, you get so bogged down with the day-to-day of just trying to get through each event that you're doing that not oftentimes do you take a step back and get that kind of 30,000-foot perspective. So I think conference life affords you that. We don't have games every night. We have certain times of the year where we're going to have events. We have the ACC men's basketball tournament, 1st of March. You can plug it in. It's in the calendar, obviously in non-COVID years.
Yep.
And you can build up to those moments. It's like the NFL. You build up to the Super Bowl as opposed to working for the Texans, where each week you're focused on your own game.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been an exciting time. Like I looked there, you're listing, that 2009, 2012 period it's like every year there'd be a new platform that, hey, we've got to test out this platform. Everyone remember Google Plus when everyone was setting up Google Plus everywhere. It's like, oh, well, we don't do that anymore, right? But it was very much that case. It's like, oh, we've done Facebook, we've done Twitter, we've done Instagram, and then a new gun comes along. It's like, everyone did it. Like, Google Plus is the one that we're making fun of, but it was that case that, oh, this new platform, is this platform going to be like those platforms? We have to do it. And it was a bit of everyone was following everyone in trends and what we're doing, and the platforms themselves were sort of maneuvering. So it was a really interesting time because it was very much in that test, learn, fail, and see what was working until we end up with the big three that we have now, with a few that are around it. And I do really agree that conference level, like the conference view of something, because you're not, I like it when I'm talking to teams and leagues, like people they're not passionate about a league. They're passionate about the school or the team in the league. So It's a really different voice and a different view when you're at a conference level. So you're very much in the college system and that up until that point, and like the US sports system, it's college to pros. And you made that leap. You moved to the Texans. What was the bit of the mind shift and the change going from college life, conference to an NFL team like the Houston Texans?
I think for me, I was born in the Bronx, New York, so I grew up with an affinity to pro teams. Like, I'm a Yankees fan, I'm a Giants fan, and so in that region of the country, you don't have as big of a following for college sports. But then I went to high school and college in Alabama, and you start to get that understanding. But for me, it was always wanting to have that ability to see what pro sports was like, because that's what I grew up as the biggest fan of. Yep. And so when the Texans job came open, I just thought it was a nice fit and transition for me, because college sports at that time, and I still would argue that at some point it's the current time, they kind of are a couple of years behind pro sports, just in terms of how they innovate and how they think of things. It's just a much bigger enterprise in college. I mean, you've got 300 Division I schools, you've got 32 NFL teams. So I thought it was a natural jump for me to try and see what I could learn specifically about the professional model. Yep. And when I got there, my eyes were really opened as to the business side of how the NFL works, and just the innovation of having to keep fans engaged. Like, the NFL is really weird. You go 7 months without playing a game, and that's normal. So how do you keep fans engaged across these tentpole events, whether it's the draft, the NFL Combine, all the workouts and stuff like that, and how technology as the big part of that. So when I got there, it was just fun and to see what it was like, and you had your goals stated specifically, and you could really immerse yourself in one team. I'd never had that experience, Sean. So I think those first couple of years at the Texans, I was drinking from a fire hose, but it was exciting because you have all these different opportunities, whether it's all the game day experiences. And I know we'll talk about some of that stuff that we were doing, and geo-targeting, and the way fans can have this omni-channel experience with you from the moment they arrive on your property. That's something you don't get the chance to, because as you mentioned, when you're a league, you have to make sure everybody is treated somewhat equally. Well, now I can take all of my knowledge, all of my passion, and funnel it into one organization. I think that was exciting. And like I said, I learned a lot. It was 6 years there. You talk about like a time period from 2013 to 2019. When I first got to the Texans, Facebook was the biggest referrer of traffic for us. Like, that was our whole strategy, using Facebook to get people back to our website. And we were growing and built in there. We're still checking in with Foursquare at that point, and like had all these different badges that you could win. And it was a big deal. And then moved to Beacon Technology now to where we are. So I think experiencing that with one organization and understanding what the main goal was for them and trying to use technology to achieve that, it was a really fun ride for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that's really unique about the NFL with just a limited amount of games, if you look at other sports that just have a volume and there's a cadence of we're playing and not playing, or we're playing in away and home, whether it's baseball or basketball, like they have so many games, hockey's the same, whereas the NFL it's like every game is an event. and but it's so compressed, like you said. There's just a short schedule, and then you've got this long period of no football. What was that? I guess that event, sort of tentpole of every single Texans home game. How much was your focus on that, and then also, I guess, the differences between a home game and an away game?
That's a good question. And I think the NFL does a great job of making their sport year round, even though they don't play, because they've made the draft an event, they've made the combine an event. So every month you feel like you have something, but you add to that, perfectly illustrated, Sean, not only do you only have 16 games, but only 8 of them are in your building, at least for the regular season. So everything that you have for those regular season games, it's like super condensed into this 3-day sprint where you're trying to activate all your sponsors, trying to make sure you get all your coverage contained. You're trying to make sure that the in-game experience is as great as it can be. So I think those were really fun. And then the away games were just a chance to cover the game as if you were the journalistic entity of the organization. So you definitely had 2 different workflows. Like if you look at the Excel sheets I would build out of our templates, this is what we have to do today. The home schedule was double what the away one was. But again, you had so many different facets. And then one year, I believe it was 2015, when we launched Wi-Fi in the stadium, that took it to another level because we started doing things where, we could geo-target messaging for our sponsors in the stadium. So on top of all the other things, I'm trying to manage how that works, trying to figure out, we had an exclusive deal with Verizon, how many of our customers were using the Verizon 5G as opposed to not, to make sure that we got the messages to them. So every week it was a different puzzle. But the pressure that comes with that, then if you get to the playoffs, it's like next level because everybody wants to be involved then. And if you don't win, like the Bills this weekend or the Packers, your season very suddenly ends. You're playing Sunday, everything. You have a chance to win. As soon as the game's over, your season's over, and then it's done. So the finality of it, I think that's what makes the NFL special, is that every game does feel that important because there are so few of them, and therefore you make them much bigger events because of it.
Yeah, very much, don't want to go all Al Pacino, but any given Sunday, fight for that inch. You're doing that in the digital
everywhere.
You're doing that in a digital sense. Like you're every single, digital inch you're fighting every single week. I wanted to mention some of the activations, some of the stuff you did at the Texans. One thing you did win was a shorty for social good. You won a shorty award, Best in Sports for the Texas Care program. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that and why it won, and what were some of the key components of it?
Yeah, sure. So at the Texans, the president, Jamie Roots, who's still there now, he had 3 imperatives every year. One of them was to do great things for Houston. And so that was a big part of our volunteer and foundation efforts. We did something every May that was called, Texans Care Day, where we solicited fans to volunteer across the entire city of Houston and really give back in the name of the Texans. And we had it worked with partners where they were sponsored in certain areas. There was food banks, all that kind of stuff. So what we wanted to do was tell that story in a fun way on social. And the great thing about it is a lot of the players, cheerleaders, and front office staff were a part of that day. So we created, it was really a Snapchat kind of activation where we had them passing along, it may be one person telling a story about why we're at the food bank, and we had the nice, the Snapchat filters, which were the rage back then, and it was branded, and we had the chance that we'd pop over to somewhere else, and it was like this organic kind of storytelling around what we were doing for the entire city, and it was really fun. And it came on the heels that next year when J.J. Watt had his outstanding, campaign where he raised over $40 million when we had Hurricane Harvey devastate the city, and so to play a small role in helping to amplify that, and working with the brands like the Ellens and, the Jimmy Fallon show that all donated to JJ Watt's fund, he gets 99.9% of the credit. I don't want to seem like in any way I'm involving myself, but, it was fun to help there and then put that under that Texans Care moniker and take the whole city underneath our wing and provide some help, assistance, and just really some hope, for people that were really dealing with a devastating time that really it changed the face of what Houston was, the city, in terms of what it left behind. So sport is often, focused so much on wins and losses and what happens on the field, but you do have the opportunity to connect with people and build that greater bond. And I will give the Texans credit. They do a fantastic job of really emphasizing the importance of the Texans to the city through volunteer and philanthropic efforts.
Yep. And I think one of the things that I guess I take away from that, but also similar initiatives, is the amount of creative bandwidth that you have as a team around some of these social initiatives. Like if you do a content audit, like here's all the things we've got to do. It's really easy to get heavy on the game day and the highlights and all of the IP around the players and what they can do. And it's a little bit of the hygiene of sport. Like they're the things you've got to cover. And yes, you've got some creative bandwidths, but time and resources get really crunched in that spot because it's done on a weekly basis. Whereas, things that are, we've got to talk about our community efforts and what we're doing. It's sort of seen sometimes as a tick the box. Oh, we've got to make sure we tell everyone we did the food bank or we're doing this thing. It's like, well, there's a real creative option that your team, if you've got a really strong creative focus for your team, that can really get their teeth into and go, what's the storytelling we can pull out here? How can we really show off our creative chops? Because you've got a bit more bandwidth and a bit more space because it's probably like a little bit off season or it's earlier in the week. It's where your content calendar isn't cluttered. It's a real opportunity for your creative people to shine. That then you can then take it back to other parts of the business to say, it's a really good place to say, we can do this kind of stuff. Let us get at it.
I'm a big fan of Maya Angelou, and one of her quotes is, it's a longer quote, so I'll concise it. She goes, I'll never forget how people will never forget how you make them feel. And I think sometimes that we get away from that because, like you said, we're so focused on the tangible results, the engagements, the amount of revenue created. But with the right social campaign, you can connect with people in a way that they won't forget ever. Yep. Like J.J. Watt will always be remembered in the city of Houston for what he did in that time of need to support people. And he's not the only one. It's obviously been replicated lots of different places. But I think sometimes we forget that human connection, whether it's something as simple as wishing somebody happy birthday from a very popular brand account, yep, or just answering a question and connecting. If people feel like they have a personal connection to you or you humanize your brand, I think they're much more likely to follow you even in times where maybe you're not as successful. Like people forget, and I know the Texans are having a bit of their issues right now with what they're going through in the front office and finding a new manager and coach and all that kind of stuff. But when you have that built-in connection, they've sold out every game in the history of their franchise, yet they haven't won a Super Bowl. And why is that? Because they've worked hard in the community to forge those relationships that go deeper than whether they win on Sunday or not.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, people, sport is tribal by nature. People have different reasons for following, and you've got to give them those reasons. So super important. One other thing I want to touch on from your time at the Houstons, and it's relevant because, the Super Bowl is coming up as we're recording this, and the Pro Bowl is not going to happen, obviously, in the current times. So they're going to be doing something. I think they're doing something in the gaming space and using Madden to replace the Pro Bowl. You did some stuff with EA Sports and Madden and gaming at your time of the Texans. How did that come about, and how was that received?
It was a partnership we had with Madden. Obviously, it makes a lot of sense because it's a football game and it's an opportunity for fans to play as their favorite teams. And I think what we thought was, how do we connect this to something larger than, okay, you're just buying the game and you're playing by yourself? It goes back to that community and feeling together. So we actually did, we hosted a Madden challenge where we had some of our players come in, and then fans were also competing against each other for a spot to be the Texans player, so to speak, in the Madden tournament that they were hosting down at the Pro Bowl. And to me, it just makes a ton of sense. I mean, you look at gaming now, and while I think gaming has the ability to stand on its own, I don't want to limit it in any way, but when you can really pair it with existing partnerships and relationships, I think it has the chance to be really, really special. And again, you look at what the NFL is doing around the Pro Bowl. I think another good example of that is what they're doing with Versus, which was a big thing here in the States. It was kind of a music competition. Now it's turned into a sports highlight competition. I think what we're finding over these past 10 months, and me and Sean, me and you were talking about it beforehand, is that we're missing that sense of togetherness, right? Like we're used to congregating at sports events. We're used to being together. Sports is one of the few things that most people can agree on no matter what their background is, right? If you're a Texans fan, if you're a North Carolina fan, don't matter Republican, Democrat, you usually have the ability to come together to support that team. And now that we don't have that, because we've obviously been in our houses a lot more in quarantine from each other, I think esports and what we're doing here with Zooms and the ability to connect virtually is, maybe not the key component of how we get through this, but it can supplement in the right areas. And I think we were a little ahead of our time with that Madden partnership, because you just saw it, right? It's the ability to play games together. You get in there. We had a guy named Charles James at the time, former NFL player, who was one of the best ranked Madden players in all of the United States. So he was challenging the fans, and there was a lot of trash talking. And just, again, you feel connected to the team outside of rooting for laundry.
Yep. And that's the thing. I think seeing a lot of pro teams sort of trying to figure out, and what is this esports gaming piece? I think the natural alignment, and it's, NFL done it with Madden, NBA have done it with 2K, is like, what does the sports sim look like? How do you engage your fans? And it's primarily a fan engagement tool to sort of draw them in. I mean, I think the MLS have got to the point where they're, doing jersey reveals in FIFA. Like, that's how popular it is, and that's how they're planning it. So I think that connection makes perfect sense. And then it's like, well, how can you extend that? How can it be another, I guess, content channel, fan engagement channel? So that's that's like looking at your time in the NFL and at the Texans, and then you are now at you've moved back to the college ranks. You're Associate Commissioner of Strategic Digital Media at the Atlantic Coast Conference. What does that role mean, and what's your part of your remit at the ACC?
So I think for me, it was an amazing opportunity to start something from scratch. So at the college conference level, there's really not a position like mine's in place yet. So like I was telling you before, college usually trails the pros by a couple of years. And so I think my role will become more prevalent in college soon. But they came to me and they were like, hey, we know this matters. We know it's important. We really don't have anybody overseeing it. And we don't have anybody that's a liaison or conduit to the schools in our league. And so me, as a natural teacher, natural coach, that was fun, to get in a room with Miami or Virginia Tech and ask them, because most of these people that are running accounts, they were either elevated videographers that did a great job, or they worked, as photographers, or, great Photoshop skills creators. And now they're all of a sudden being tasked with running an organization for social. And they're really two different skill sets, right? Managing and doing doesn't mean that you can't have both, but they're different. And so I've spent a lot of time here just helping them to organize, what does your staff look like? They all say, I need more resources. Well, what resources do you need? How are you tied into your marketing group? Because what we've learned over the past 10 months is that digital obviously really matters. It's becoming the first touch point for engagement with fans. It's the first touch point for revenue generation outside of the live events. So when you don't have them, you got to go to digital. And so now that their bosses, their athletic directors are more aware of these things, when they come to you, do you have a plan in place or the ability to show them something that lets them know that this department's not run by a whim, it's run by a process. Here's the goals that we have. Here's what we're tracking analytically. So just helping them to think that way. And so I've spent, like I said, a lot of time kind of setting that up, and then also organizing the technology for the league. So when we have these big events, the basketball tournament, our football championship game, how are we using technology to make those events better? And I just think there's never been anybody like me in the room. Doesn't mean that we're reinventing the wheel here, but just me being in the room. We had he's a good example. So ticketing went all mobile last year, not last year, sorry, 2020, but 2019.
Yep.
And so at our event, it was all mobile, and they were nervous. So I was like, first off, calm down. I did this when I was at the Texans in 2015. We're fine.
Yeah.
But then because I was in the room to talk with them about what other challenges they faced, one challenge they faced is that they had really slow wait times to get into the stadium because everybody went to the same entry point, the same gate.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so I was like, oh, we can fix that. They were like, what do you mean? I was like, well, we can geo-target, and then we can tell people, hey, don't go to gate 2, go to gate 3 because there's no wait.
Yep.
And they're like, really? And just because I was in the room, we were able to, I could show them the foot traffic moving. And then the following year when we did it, we had the slowest wait times, and we had about 50% of our arena in an hour before the game, 50% of our fans. So that's a big win for us to get them in early, not have any problems. So just how do we use technology? It's like I always say, right? Technology is a problem solver. I think most people think of social and digital as your Twitter feed, your Instagram feed, but really it's more than that. It's the ability to solve business problems. So I keep trying to hammer that home with our group. If you have a problem with, your vendor, if you have a problem with ticketing, if you have a problem with, whether it's NIL or, compliance, these are all digital issues. How can we help you? So that's the way I've tried to position it, and also teach the schools something similar so they can extend that to their campuses.
Yeah, I mean that digital as a problem solver is a vital one, because otherwise, if your digital team is just seen as the resource, like, oh, they're the resource that do this, and you're just a head count and not solving problems and driving revenue and being part of the bigger solution, then it'll just, it's really hard for the digital team to grow, and it needs to, because it is, the touch points are so many. It's not just the comms and the content. It can drive more people, again, in a new world, more people into a stadium and those kind of things. But they're the outcomes of digital that sometimes are hard to make those connections. But as a digital team, you need to be pushing yourself in that way. Can't talk about all things digital and the like without talking about the year that was 2020. What were some of the challenges of being in that role? Like, you were still probably 6 months into that role, sort of when COVID hit, and you made the transition to working from home. Like, what were some of the things in, like, managing your team, working with your team at the ACC, but then also working with all the different colleges? I'm assuming obviously your travel schedule would have been much lighter. Like, I'm assuming you would have been going to colleges, and a lot of that was virtual. What were some of the differences and challenges in the experience over the past 12 months?
Man, there's so much to unpack there. You're right. I mean, I'm at home right now. We haven't been into the office full time since all this happened back in March. So you're right. We had to go from, there's one thing I learned about sports and I took for granted, is how much of our schedule is built around the sports that we follow. Mm-hmm. So I explained that a little bit. So we know in April in the United States that it's the Masters. We know that March is March Madness. We know that September means the start of football season. But when you have all of these sports in flux, the things that we can count on in our schedule are no longer there. So I think that was eye-opening for us, because we have this built-in runway of content that we're preparing to do, and all of a sudden it's no longer available. So what we tried to do, at least from a content perspective early on, was tie into the emotions that our fans would have been experiencing had things been normal. Okay. So one thing that's big in college sports, obviously, is the NCAA men's and women's basketball tournaments. Everybody fills out a bracket. It's an exciting time. We tried to replicate that with a best players in ACC men's basketball history bracket that unveiled the same day that tournament would have, played down to 16 to 4-2. So at least there was some connection to that. And I think what I learned during that time period is that fans really love, more so sometimes than the games themselves, the debate on what could have happened. And so we took that to the next level, and we started replicating for football when we were unsure whether we'd play the season. We'd do things like, who's the best, quarterback in ACC history? Well, you get Clemson folks arguing for Deshaun Watson. You get Louisville folks arguing for Lamar Jackson. You get NC State folks saying, no, it's Phil Rivers. Then Boston College is like, hey, Matt Ryan. And so just making them feel connected to the sports that they love and the people that they follow was a big emphasis for us. But I think as a leader, what I learned the most the past year is just to continue to lead with empathy and understanding. Like, we're all in a different situation, and you don't know personally what's going on in people's lives. So always go in with the assumption of, hey, what can I do? What can I do to help you? What can we talk about? How can we make your situation as close to normal as possible, with understanding that it'll never be normal in the situation that we're in? So I think we spent a lot of time, and when it comes to social justice, which was a big thing here this past summer, as a person of color, we spent a lot of time just talking with each other about how we're feeling. Because I think social too, what we've got to be aware of with the people that we work with, is a lot of folks can turn off social media when things get a little, when it's tough, when it's negative. We can't do that, right? We're involved in it every single day. And so where do we find an outlet for ourselves so that we can have the creativity break needed to make sure that we stay on top of what we're doing? And so again, we spent a lot of time. We've built up some, what we call like these just rest stations, where it's 15, 20 minutes of us just chatting, how's things going? Just a lot of ability to try to put yourself in other people's shoes. Again, I'm very fortunate, but I've got, at one point, like most people, I had my son upstairs doing virtual schooling. I had my daughter in the dining room. I had me here. I had my wife doing telehealth in the kitchen. And we're all trying to make this work. So just understanding that nothing's normal, and trying really hard to connect with people personally, and making sure you're giving them the support that they need from a mental health perspective, from a sanity perspective. And that's really what I try to focus on as a leader.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot there. And I think some of the takeaways for mine was this. One of the phrases I use in the podcast a lot is "steal with pride." And so I love the hey, that's what sports talk radio have been doing for 30 years. Make up a topic and everyone talks about it, and everyone loves it. And it's like, that's what, who's the best quarterback is. Like, there's all, as a content option, they're always there because the fans love to talk about it. So tapping into that is vital. And then the other piece is, like you said, the care and Zoom fatigue, potentially. Like, we're all on these calls, and so there is the upside of it of, hey, we all can get together, we can collaborate, and it's easier to do via Zoom, and not everyone has to travel to have all the digital directors together, so you can do it more often. But then also that other piece of, like, how do we replicate the water cooler? How do we have that conversation of, how's your weekend? How much hair have you pulled out this weekend or this week around virtual schooling and all of that kind of stuff? Because that's what you would be talking about at work, and that's the camaraderie of your work colleagues. So it's it's how do you do that in this new environment without saying, oh, we have to schedule in water cooler for 15 minutes on a Tuesday to tick the box. It's a real key piece for people management, just being a good teammate, I guess.
Sean, I'm curious because you have such great experience with how the world is connecting through sports. How do you feel this will change the idea of being in an office moving forward? Because we're having some of those discussions now about, what does this look like? Do you have teams that are now remote but in the same time zone? What does it look like, you think, that kind of idea of office moving forward as it pertains to sports?
Yeah, I think it will. There will be a new normal. I think there are certain roles that don't necessarily need to be in an office. So I think office footprints, or the office footprint of sport, potentially could be smaller. But I also think there will be more people coming together on certain days. Like in my part of the world, people are starting to return. I think 50% of public companies are allowed to now return to the office, and so there's this rotational system of when you're going back. So I think there might be a cost saving in smaller footprints from an office point of view, but then there also might be more flexibility on tapping into resources that are particularly specialised. So we might see more use of freelance graphic artists or freelance videographers, that kind of thing, where and that might be people who have been doing that for many, many years. So spoke to Tyson Beck recently, a graphic design artist that's worked out of Adelaide for 10 years, and he's worked with the NBA and Topps and a whole bunch of brands, and he's always done it in that model. To people who unfortunately have been furloughed or moved on, or as departments have downsized, but they find themselves in that role, and they actually can get the flexibility of potentially working with 4 or 5 colleges in the ACC and offer similar services. So I think some of the hang-ups of, surely we can't let Eric be at home and do work. Is he really doing work? Can we get someone to look over his shoulder and just check his work? Like, that trust issue that was there of working from home that existed up until early 2020 has gone away. It's like, oh, everyone's worked from home for 12 months and everything's still getting done. Oh, we can trust these people. So that trust between employer, employee, or or contractor and freelancer, those kind of things has grown. So I think that's a positive. And so people will be able to work from home. There won't be that, hey, who's that small person behind you on the call? Like, we're professional. Like, that's gone out the window. And so I think there's some of the, if we're looking for positives, like, they're positives to say, oh, I'm doing work and I can be a parent and I can homeschool and I can go make dinner and I can finish my work at 9:00 because that's when the kids are in bed. Like, that flexibility, I think that if, as industries embrace it, and I think sports embrace it, will actually be good. It'll keep potentially more people in the industry, and potentially open up other opportunities. And then freelancer opens up that piece of, oh, we've got a big campaign, we need to scale up. Oh, now there's a better infrastructure to go, oh, I'm just going to pull the trigger and that person's going to help us with their campaign. So I think there's going to be a few more levers that you can pull as someone running a digital team or a digital department or a brand. That I guess the flexibility of work from home freelance will be. So yeah, that's sort of I guess my take on that space.
It's interesting because of most of the department sectors, I would argue that we've been busier since the start of the pandemic as opposed to others not having as many opportunities to engage. I think the entire focus shifted right when pandemic hit to digital.
Yep.
And I think most would argue that we were understaffed to begin with. So there's just kind of malleable idea and platform of what this looks like. So I'm fascinated as just somebody, I pick your brain a lot about just high level things. What do you think? Because what I find fascinating is now we understand digital's importance, but how do we get the infrastructure in digital? And how do we make sure that it's married in? Because digital was always built, at least in my experience, on the back of something else, never as its own department, right? So in college, some digital departments report to communications, some to marketing. They were never thought of as their own entity. They were okay, we need to do this. So, hey, you guys that are already doing marketing, I'm just going to add this to your plate. And I think the paradigm shift over the next couple of years from brands understanding, the digital spend is already outpacing the television spend, right? So we know this is where the dollars are going. How do we kind of reevaluate what these organizations look like from a digital structure? I don't know over there what it's like, but we don't have many, I would say, chief digital officers. Yeah. We don't have that here in sport. I think the highest you might see is a vice president of digital. You don't see a lot of C-suite people, but that's going to have to happen soon because all of these interactions, as we know, whether it's Netflix, whether it's music and streaming, all of it is digital. So I'd just be interested to see how that transforms over the next couple of years.
Yeah, and I think I've already put my nominations in for Digital Transformation Officer of the Year. COVID's going to win, because it has caused so much innovation in digital. And for people like you and I have been banging the digital drum for many years, saying, "Hey, look, all these digital fans when they weren't allowed to be in a stadium." There was a lot of people in the world of sport going, "Hang on, what's happening? Oh, there's no fans in our stands." And we're like, guys, guess what? Millions of fans over here. Been talking to them the whole time. Yeah, we're the digital team. So, I think that's where it raises importance, understanding that you're now having a conversation with, C-suite and the like to say, no, we're not talking about how many likes we've got. That was 2012. There's still a lot of C-suite that are saying, what's our like count and why haven't we caught up to the other team? When now you can start diving into the real numbers and what it means and moving business results. So I think, that's the opportunity to say, this is why digital is important. All of those activations that were in the stadium that were being done in 2019 that couldn't get done in 2020, hello, this is Mr. Make Good. It's called digital, right? And that's where we've moved them all. And so most of those campaigns and most of those sponsors, they won't all bounce back and turn, cross off digital. They'll go, oh, it's an and. We will do the stadium activation and it will be supported and amplified by digital, and they'll get it. We won't have to be selling it, or we won't have to be convincing them. They'll go, oh, that actually worked really well. And so that's the other thing. I think that there's some verticals that have never done digital that had to, because they're like, we do stadium activations. We always do stadium activations. We don't need to do that. Yeah, that bouncy castle at the stadium does great for us. And then you go, but hang on, what if we also got email and got people to sign up? And they're like, wow, that's so much better than a bouncy castle. But that's the piece where I think there's so much upside from a digital point of view. And yeah, I agree. Chief digital officers aren't there. I've been joking that that's pretty much my consulting role. I come into a team and effectively act as a chief digital officer and sort of help connect the dots between different departments. I think that will continue to evolve as people come out of this and realize, hey, this is a real important part of a sports business.
I think it's wonderful too, because what we're thinking about digital, and I know you got questions, I'm sorry, but this is just kind of the way my mind works. It's gone from how do we reach scale all the time to now much more personalized experience in digital. Your Netflix queue is different than mine, right?
Yep.
And the way we expect brands to interact with us, not only do we want that one-to-one connection, but we expect that you should know what our preferences are going in. So as we're even talking about the simplest levels of, having a fan order food at the stadium or something like that. We've got to get to the point where we know that person orders this, this, and this, and we should have it for them the moment that they sit down. Like, it's even taking this large cloud of data and then finding the personal connection to each one of your fans. And now that's hard. It takes a lot of work and connecting the dots, like you said. But to me, that's even the more exciting piece, because we're not just spraying and praying anymore. Now we have the ability to take it all the way down to each individual interaction. And there's a special way to make that person feel, like I mentioned earlier, personally invested in your brand and your team. And you have the ability to do that through digital because of the information and the ways that that they work into what you're doing as an organization. So I find that fascinating, because now we've got to drill down even more. And that, I don't know, to me, that's a really fun challenge.
And it is that piece is, the opposite, to sort of take that. It's the opposite of some of that early digital, because early digital was, how do we grow the audiences? How do we get to as many people? How many viral videos can we get with as many millions of views? That was the success piece. Whereas now, setting up a new content series or doing something that drives deep, but with a particular, I will say niche. For my American fans, we'll call it a niche, right? Like, that dives deep with that niche, right? And that small audience, but it's really deep and, creates a bond, and those people end up, following the team, back to the point, following the team or following the conference because of that. And there's success in, we have a podcast that only 100,000 people listen, as opposed to a TikTok video that has millions of views. And it's like, there's a real reason why this worked. And it's not, we're not selling the millions, because you want, deep engagement with that particular audience. And so I think that's where there is also that piece of, we're not going for the, mass appeal, mainstream, please everybody, because there's some content pieces you can build just for a particular segment. And that's the purpose, to engage that segment in a deep and meaningful manner. And potentially you might get a commercial outcome, whether it be a ticket buy or commercials partnership that really matches with it. And that's where I think there's some exciting stuff ahead for the world of digital.
There's so many pieces, right? Like, I look behind you and what the Braves need and what the Warriors need and what Wake Forest Demon Deacons need, all really different. So I think what I try to do as a digital lead is to be aware of all these different platforms, whether it's the clubhouses or the this, that, and the other. They may not work for me today, but there's an opportunity there in the future, just if you know everything that's in your tool belt. And to your point, we're going to get to the point where we're running campaigns specifically tied to each one of these channels that don't overlap with each other, and just building all these different personalized and smaller communities. And like you said, that's so antithetical to what we were doing 5 or 6 years ago, because we were trying to amass. Now it's trying to really personalize. And to me, that's a lot of fun, because it's just puzzle pieces, right? And you're trying to figure out how they all fit.
Terrific. Before we wrap up, I want to get into the Sports Geek closing five. I'm here with Eric SanInocencio. I nearly got it again. SanInocencio.
There you go.
SanInocencio. Again, apologies. I'm trying.
No, you're fine.
I'm trying.
You're fine.
The Sports Geek closing five. Do you remember the first sports event you ever attended?
Yes, it was a New York Mets baseball game. We went, I believe it was April. It was freezing. I remember being underneath a jacket for most of the time. But a young man
at Old Shea Stadium.
Old Shea Stadium. But I remember a young man named Darryl Strawberry hit a home run. And if you want to talk about affinity and growing with somebody, he became my favorite baseball player from that point forward. I think I got like 40 of his cards. Okay. And I loved him just for that moment. So.
Okay. So not even close, but my Darryl Strawberry story is, how he was featured in The Simpsons, where they were, doing the Darryl chant. Every time I go to a basketball game and there'd be a player that was called Darryl, we would bust out the Darryl chant in honor of Darryl Strawberry. But one of the best Simpsons episodes. You would have been to a lot of sports events in your time in the world of sport. Do you have a favorite food memory or a go-to food at a sports event?
I'm going to stick with the Texans because I went to so many of those games, but they have Killen's barbecue. So they would get a barbecue sandwich that they would have up in the press box for us. It was unbelievable, the barbecue there. The brisket sandwich was just great. We ate so much food. That's the one thing about these sporting events. When you're working in the press boxes, they just overfeed you. But that's probably my favorite, the brisket sandwich.
I have heard a few people because there hasn't been any press boxes to go to, and they're like, actually, why am I so light? Oh, that's right, I'm not going to so many sporting events and just hitting up the press food bar there. What's the first app you open in the morning?
Nuzzle. I don't know if you're familiar with that app.
I am familiar with
fantastic. Nuzzle. Yeah, I like it a lot. It allows me to catch up on all the stories that people I follow across the industry are retweeting or sharing or posting. So that's the first thing I usually wake up to make sure that, because I follow a lot of people outside of sports, whether it's politics, news, just to be aware. So Nuzzle for me.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, Nuzzle, Nuzzz or Z. ULEL? So it's an app that curates effectively your social feed and says, here's all the stories your followers are sharing. So it effectively bubbles up effectively what your network is sharing. And I'm a constant user of it. Check the email every day. It's one of my secret sources that I use to find articles for Sports Geek News. Because it really pulls it in. I mean, I don't know why Twitter just doesn't buy it, so it's integrated into your feed. It's a perfect matchup for mine.
You would think it makes too much sense.
Do you on Nuzzle? And I'm just going to dive. Do you occasionally jump in on other people to see what their feed looks like?
100%.
Yeah,
I'm a little nosy. I like to go. My favorite is Friends of Friends. We're getting deep into the app, but you scroll first. It's your friends of friends, and then it's best of Nuzzle, like the most. Yep. I like Friends of Friends because I enjoy meeting new people and getting different perspectives. And I'm going to the next question that you have, but you get to see all these people that are tangentially connected to you. You're like, oh wow, this person, especially in sports, it's pretty small. So yes, I'm quite the spire on Nuzzle.
But the Friends of Friends thing is important. And again, we're getting deep in the weeds, but that's what it's my podcast.
This is a Nuzzle.
A Nuzzle. The Nuzzle deep
commercial.
Dive, right? But the thing is, then it also gets you out of your bubble because again, Twitter is a good example. When I say, you sort of get comfortable and cozy, you go, cool, I'm good. And when's the last time you followed someone else on Twitter? And it's like, oh, well, I did it when I started and I found you people. And then it was like, oh, I'm fine. And it's like, Twitter has started to say, hey, you should follow other people. It's taken a long while for it to do that. And that's like,
for sure, yeah.
You don't actually, you end up in these are the people I talk to. Oh, who else should I talk to? And so it does help with that piece. Both big fans of Nuzzle here. Let us know if you're on Nuzzle.
Send us a t-shirt. No, I'm just kidding, Nuzzle. Send us a t-shirt.
Yeah, exactly. So then the next question is there someone that the podcast listeners should follow that you follow, and why? Whether it might be someone on Twitter or it might be an author or it might be a colleague, what would it be?
So I'm going to go with two different versions, because I think on Twitter I enjoy following topics more than people. Like I obviously have the people I follow every day, but I've really tried to push myself to think more from a marketing mindset instead of social and digital and understanding. So I like the hashtag marketing and then hashtag marketing Twitter. There are lots of people there, whether it's educators, people who work for big brands outside of sports. Again, I always come back to, because sports is a bubble and you got to get out of it. And I think on the book side, I'm a huge, obviously, Malcolm Gladwell fan. I've read a lot of his books, and not because I agree with everything he says, but he makes me think in a way that challenges kind of my natural, idea of how things should run. So I would say marketing Twitter, and then Gladwell, like you can read Blink, you can read, there's a million, I'm Talking to Strangers, which is the one he just came out with a bit ago. I really enjoy those two. Anything that makes me contemplate a new way of understanding, you've got me hooked. That's usually what gets me.
Yeah, I've read a few of the Gladwell, and I also I like him when he gets on a podcast and someone starts sort of picking away at his brain. He has got definitely a unique view of the world. Last question: what social media platform is your MVP? And you can answer. You get two answers. You get to answer this as the ACC, and you get to answer this as yourself. Like I give you two answers, but you only get one. Like I'm really strict here. We're not giving out participation awards here. You only get one MVP.
Okay, for the ACC, our MVP is Twitter.
Yep.
Just because we are smaller still and we're trying to grow to larger audiences. So that's the biggest way that we can reach many people as we can. I think personally, I'm going to go off the board. I don't know if this counts, but I count it. For me, podcasts are the MVP. Oh. I listen to like 20 podcasts a day. I'm a weirdo, Sean. I listen on 3 times speed.
Oh, 3.
Okay, so I have 3 times speed. So I will listen to podcasts. I go for a walk every day at lunch when my kids get home, when I'm running. So podcasts to me, like I listen to, whether it's Gladwell's podcast, whether it's data podcasts, social podcasts, they're the MVP because it introduces me to all these different worlds and it stimulates my mind in ways that are fantastic. So I don't know if podcast counts as a social
podcast.
platform.
Hey, you're on a podcast. It definitely counts. 3 times 3. Bravo to you. It does. It's hard coming off a high speed.
It
and
is.
then talking to someone, you're like,
with the music
what?
too. The music though, Joe.
Yeah. Why? Why are they say drunk? And no, that's normal speed. Like it's really, and, I constantly do if you listen to my podcast at 2 times, please let me know and I'll speed up when we meet in real life. Cause it's like, wow. So as a podcaster, I'm a big believer that podcasting has a discovery and a marketing problem. Like it is hard to, there's not really good platforms to tell you this is a good podcast. And so it's so reliant on word of mouth, right? And so this is my call to action. If you're listening to this podcast, please tell a friend, right? That's first. That's to
100%.
you, the listener. So then I'm going to ask you, and because I always, when someone says they're a podcast listener, I say, well, so what do you listen to? So what is in your queue? What are some of the podcasts that you listen to that potentially, and again, you can go off the board. It can be other sports, business, marketing podcasts, because, as a podcaster, I'm always looking for other podcasts because I know, I put out 1 episode a week, hopefully, if all things are well. That's 1 hour or, in your case, 15 minutes of your week. And, if you've got to walk, or back in the olden days when people had to commute, I sort of look at that hour commute that people have potentially to and from work. That's 2 hours of podcast time. That's where you just go, sorry, radio, I'm never doing you again. I'm picking content I like. But then you've got to fill, whether it's that 20 hours or 15 hours a week with podcasts. So you're looking at your podcast app now. What are the podcasts that you listen to?
So I'm going to give you one narrative podcast because I love those that tell specific stories about things that happen in business. My favorite one from the past year was something called We Crashed. Okay. It was a podcast about how WeWork took this meteoric rise, and Adam Newman was like this god for a while. And then it was all kind of built on the back of some shady dealings and Alibaba and all that kind of stuff. So I really enjoyed that one. I think for one that I listen to every single day, I would encourage people to listen to a podcast called The Moment with Brian Koppelman.
Big fan of Brian. Yep.
He's a writer. For those that don't know, he wrote Billions, The Rounders. And what he does is he has people on and he gets them to talk about these deep kind of connections to the way they think about the world, the way they think about their craft. He had one with Doc Rivers a couple weeks ago, Sean, that was just tremendous. It was on leadership and the ability to understand, what certain people need from you. So again, I keep coming back to these same things, people that make me think differently. But The Moment with Brian Koppelman is one that I look forward to every week. Even if it's a person I've never heard of, he has affinity for 70s rock band, people. I don't listen to that music, but I still find it intensely enjoyable because the way he gets them to talk about how they feel and how they think about their craft is just something that it's really caught on with me.
Yeah, definitely. I'm a big fan of Brian Koppelman because the whole premise is he's trying to find out when they got the moment, when they got it, what was that light bulb thing that made them the best at what they do. And so he's talking to film producers and entertainers and authors and really interesting people. Highly recommend. The other one that I just listened to in the last week because I hadn't caught up to it, that I'm going to recommend to you is Tim Ferriss interviewing Jerry Seinfeld.
Okay. Let me download it right now.
So Tim Ferriss, I'm a bit of a hit and miss with Tim, but one of my favorite ones is I think he did an interview with Arnold Schwarzenegger about 2 years ago, and that's absolutely another really interesting deep dive listen because he really goes into the craft of your process and those kind of things. And for Jerry, and I'm a big Seinfeld fan, he talks about the craft of creative writing, stand up, and how Jerry gets around doing it and effectively hacking his mind to get his work done. So if you're someone that gets stuck trying to be creative, trying to work, Tim really unpacks how Jerry Seinfeld does it, and has done it for many, many years. So, definitely worth a listen. Eric, where can thank you very much for your time today. I really do appreciate it.
This was fun. Yeah, this was a lot of fun.
Where can people find you on this wide world internet that we have? What are the best platforms for people to reach out and say, Eric, I really appreciated the conversation, and I hope that I say your name better than Sean did.
No problem. Twitter at Eric San, so ERICSAN. I think LinkedIn is always a great place to find me. Start with my last name. There's not many of us with that last name, so I should be easy to find. Those are probably the main two platforms. I usually try to respond to just about everybody, especially students, people who are looking to get advice or understand a little bit more about my story. I'm happy to do that. So reach out. And if there's ever anything I can do to help anyone listening in terms of getting into sports or better understanding the digital space and wanting to make it a career, please feel free to connect with me. Well,
Eric, thank you very much. I hope in the very near future, when the world starts becoming back normal and we're allowed to travel, I hope to be in your part of the world and potentially
No.
being at
I got to
ACC
go over there.
Game.
I'm going over there.
You're more than welcome to come here. I'm happy to host you at a game at the MCG or the like. But once we let people in, like I don't think I'm allowed to leave, and I don't think we're letting anyone in. It's the advantages of living on a big island, but it does restrict my travel options. So I am longingly looking through my Google photos of travel and of the past, but I hope to do it in the future. But thank you very much for coming on the podcast, and I look forward to chatting with you soon in real life or in Zoom.
Thank you very much, Sean. You have a wonderful week.
Find out more about Sports Geek's Digital to Dollars process at digitaltodollars.com. We'd love your support on our Patreon campaign. Go to sportsgeekhq.com/Patreon.
Thanks again to Eric SanInocencio at Eric San, S-A-N, on Twitter. Please send him a tweet. Tell him that you've listened to the episode, and please connect with him and check out some of the things he's writing on his LinkedIn page. They will be linked in the show notes. You can always find the show notes and everything in the podcast by going to sportsgeekhq.com and then just following the links to the podcast and find the episode that you are looking for. One thing I am excited about, and I want you to stay tuned, the interviews are booked. I cannot wait to announce our Sports Geek Amplified cohort. I absolutely know you will love them. The whole idea of the Sports Geek Amplified series is to profile businesses that are going to help sports bounce back. And we're going to dive into how they go about doing it and how they can solve problems for you. You can go to sportsgeekamplified.com. That's it. It's that big. We've got a new domain for it. That's where you'll be able to find everything. You can register there for a sneak peek and early access one day before it gets released to the podcast platform. So go to sportsgeekamplified.com to check it out. A little bit of a teaser, a little bit of a sneak peek, but we're not telling everyone who's part of it just yet. But I am booking the interviews and having those conversations over the next 2 weeks. So I'm getting absolutely pumped to share these stories and these technology partners with you. Don't forget, all Patreon subscribers are going to get that early access, and they're going to get a few little snippets of bonus content. So if you're a Patreon subscriber, keep an eye on your inbox. And if you are a sports technology or a marketing solution that can help sports bounce back, we are starting to take applications of interest for Season 2 of Sports Geek Amplify. So please go to sportsgeekamplify.com and register your interest. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to help sport bounce back. Before I wrap up this episode, what I wanted to do is to talk about a little bit of a fight that's happening in the world, in my part of the world. In my part of the world, in the digital world, which is really my world. So at the moment, we have on one side the Australian government with their media partners, and on the other side, in the other corner, is Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook. So this week, as of recording, the government has been pushing for some new media legislation that asks the digital giants, and when we say digital giants, we are talking about Facebook and Google. They want the digital giants to pay the media outlets for their content. And they were bringing in legislation to effectively enforce that. Google, which is much to my surprise, they they brokered a deal. I won't say they caved, but they brokered a deal with several of the news organisations here, News.com, News Corp, Channel 7, Channel 9, Fairfax, to say, yes, we will pay you an amount. It appears to be around $30 million for the media companies, so they can effectively license their content onto this new Google News product. And for mine, I at least understand that as a model. Google wants the content on their platform, and they are paying the media companies for that. I can see some validity in that model. It has been pushed along by government, and there's been obviously a lot of lobbying by News Corp, Rupert Murdoch in particular, to get the government to force the digital giants into this position. So the Google domino dropped, but Facebook said, well, in true Australian vernacular, yeah, nah. And their contention was that most of their traffic being driven to news sites has been free. They're sending a lot of free traffic, free eyeballs to news websites, and they have their very much their right to monetize it. So they weren't willing to broker deals with media organisations to pay for that content, and so they really went with the nuclear option. Early Thursday morning, they put out a statement, and they blocked news organisations from using Facebook. So big media companies and big media outlets, if you went to their Facebook page, there was no posts. And in addition to that, and the second twist was users could not even share that news content on the Facebook platform. So we saw media traffic referral from Facebook go from here to zero. So Facebook effectively called the bluff of the government in trying to force these payments through to big media. Some of the, I guess, collateral damage. One, I think there was some definite issues in Facebook's implementation. They went a little bit wider than just shutting down media outlets. They shut down some sports. And so I was looking at it from a sports point of view. They were shutting down some sports pages, some that had signified themselves as a media outlet. So we had cricket.com.au. We've had a few guests from cricket previously. Like they pitched their cricket.com.au as a cricket media business. So that was shut down, whereas AFL and NRL were still categorized as sports leagues and were not blocked. But it was very much inconsistent. There was a few other pages caught up in the lockdown. So we saw, for instance, Gravitas was fine, but we saw other esports teams get locked down. We've seen some sports teams get locked down and and others not. So there was a little bit of poor implementation, but the message was heard loud and clear across both Australia and also the media. So the media has been in a frenzy to say bad Facebook. But for mine, I actually think the Australian government is pushing a barrow that is very much motivated by big media, and their model has not adapted to the new digital platforms, the new digital ecosystem. It's just that they've got a lot of money to sway and lobby. I could say bully government to get what they want. Unfortunately, there's a lot of really smart, nimble, agile digital publishers that have also been caught up in this, that have worked with Facebook as a partner. They know that Mark Zuckerberg is their landlord. They know the changes that potentially will come down the pipe, but they know what they're getting into, and now we've got the government sort of stepping in that's causing and disrupted that business. So seen some really smart people, the guys at Basketball Forever, the guys at Zero Digital, that have built out valid businesses on Facebook and following all the rules, only to have that stop overnight. So it's still to play out. I mean, I'm recording this on Saturday. They might have started to wind back particular, blocks on pages. But we have seen, unfortunately, we've seen shopping centres closed down on Facebook. We've seen health and emergency service pages shut down. We've seen mothers groups Facebook pages shut down. So I think Facebook has obviously got some issues in its implementation. Whether that implementation issue was deliberate or accidental, I'm not going to get into full conspiracy theory on that. But I do think the government has mishandled this approach, and to have our Prime Minister say that Facebook is arrogant and a bully, I think Mr. Morrison should look in the mirror, because that's pretty much how he has been as a leader over the past 12 months. And I think he could not have handled this any worse. He really does look like he is just a puppet for big media. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. It's been also interesting to analyse and watch the media and what they've been sharing over the past 5 days, victimising and making Mark Zuckerberg the victim. I know Facebook does a lot of things that are in the space of worrying about whether it's evil or not, good morally or ethically. But I actually think in this case, a lot of the people have gone onto the platform, understood what the platform is doing, and leveraged the platform and used it the way it was intended. And Facebook is starting to provide monetization options. There's a lot of businesses that have been built, as I said, working within the confines of the monetization options that Facebook is offering. It's just that the digital media business the traditional media business was dying before Facebook came along, and they're just trying to get some more runway effectively. I mean, if Blockbuster had billionaire owners, they would be complaining to government about Netflix. If more billionaires owned taxi licenses, we'd probably see governments complaining about Uber. So I don't think it's this exactly the same thing. I understand that they've changed the advertising and digital marketing landscape, but that means it's changed, and that's mean your business model has to change. Facebook has been sending a stack of traffic to media publishers. The smart ones are still making money. The ones that aren't, or that are having concerns, are the ones that are lobbying government. So it's going to be one to watch this space. But yeah, unfortunately at this time, and it'll be interesting to see if it goes any further. If you're in the US or Europe, you can't go to an Australian news organisation and share it, because it appears that pages are locked down via pages and also by domains. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. For those who are caught up in it, my advice, for what it's worth, is sit tight. Don't try to get around the rules. Like I have joked, change your Facebook page to Donut Shop and you should be fine. But I think anytime you try to get around Facebook's rules, you just leave yourself open for the algorithm to say, hang on, it looks like they're doing something outside the rules and actually causing more problems. So I hope they get to a resolution, or at least make sure that the people who are pushing the agenda are the ones that are punished, or the ones that are blocked. I'm sure there's a whole bunch of media, small media and nimble digital media outlets, as I described before, that would sign up or opt out of this archaic media code that the Australian government's trying to put through. Anyway, that's my take. I don't normally record the intros and outros to the podcast via video, but when I sort of wrote this down, I thought I'll do it and I will share this on my platforms, because I actually think the government is in the wrong. I think Facebook implemented their bully strategy very poorly, but it got the appropriate attention of politicians in a bit of a tiz. So we'll see how it plays out over the next couple of days, or potentially weeks. Hopefully it's shorter. That's it for this episode. As always, I'm available. Go to sportsgeekhq.com. There's plenty of prompts there to either book a phone call, book in an office hours if you're looking for a new job in 2021, or let's have a chat about how I can help you. I love working with podcast listeners, whether it's working on new content initiatives, helping you review your content and social media efforts. Maybe you might be concentrating on other platforms if there's problems with the world of Facebook. I don't like the advice where a lot of people are going, hey guys, go to my Instagram, guys owned by Facebook, or developing campaigns for engaging your fans and your sponsors, as well as happy to talk about digital to dollars to help develop your audiences and develop your revenue, look at rate cards and the like. So simply go to sportsgeekhq.com. It's really that simple. Check out sportsgeekamplify.com. Like I said, I'm really excited. That series is going to come out soon. Make sure you book in for the next Zoom calls. Go to sportsgeekhq.com/Zoom calls once a month. We're going to really crack in, really enjoy the one that we had this month. We dove into the world of digital collectibles, NFTs. So you never know where a Zoom call will go, but it's a great way to network. And it's great to have people like Eric SanInocencio turn up to a Zoom call. That's where I met Eric. He came to a Zoom call last year, and now he's been on the podcast. I'm very much appreciative of it. That's it from me. Thank you very much to my Sports Geek Patreon subscribers. You can go to sportsgeekhq.com/Patreon. Until next week, my name is Sean Callanan, and you've been listening to Sports Geek.
We'd love your support on our Patreon campaign. Go to sportsgeekhq.com/Patreon. Want to help drive more revenue from your digital efforts? Book a time for a call. Go to sportsgeekhq.com/phone call.